A woman walks between the roundhouses. The ground is heavy with mud. It's rained for 3 days, and the timber planks laid across the worst of it have sunk at their edges, dark water pooling in the gaps. She steps carefully. The air smells of wood smoke and wet thatch. Above the main hall, steam rises where the fire inside meets the cold. It's late autumn. The harvest is in, the cattle have been brought closer, penned near the settlement, and the fields beyond are stubble and bare earth waiting for frost. A dog lies in the lee of the forge, its chin on its paws. 2 women sit at the grinding stone outside the nearest roundhouse, working in silence. Normally they would talk, the steady rhythm of the stones loosening conversation the way walking does. But they're quiet today. Everyone is quiet. The men stand in clusters near the hall, speaking carefully, falling still when others approach. Children move between the buildings with the wary attentiveness of children who know something is wrong, but have not been told what. Something has gone from this place. Not a thing you can see, a presence, an authority. The man who sat in the hall and made the decisions that held this settlement together, that held the kingdom together, is no longer here. The smoke from the pyre is cleared. The mourning is done. What remains is the silence that follows, and the weight of everything that has not yet been decided. She passes the forge, the weaving house, the smaller storehouses along the southern edge of the compound. She stops at the large storehouse near the hall. Inside, the sacks of barley are stacked against the far wall, baskets of dried peas, bundles of smoked meat hanging from the beams. She counts what is there. She's been counting all week. Grain, cattle, iron, the tribute that will be owed when the Romans next send their collectors. It falls to her now, the tallies, the stores, the disputes between households, the questions from the elders that used to go to Prasatagus, and now come to her. This is the work of a queen. Boudica has managed this settlement alongside her husband for years. She knows its rhythms, but the weight of it is different now. The decisions are hers alone, and behind every decision, behind every grain count and boundary dispute and allocation of stores, sits the question she cannot answer. What will Rome do with the will? She knows the will. She helped shape it. Half the kingdom to their daughters, half to the Emperor Nero. It was not generosity, it was calculation. Enough for Rome to accept, enough for the bloodline to survive. The last careful act of a careful man. She understood the logic, she agreed with it, but now she waits. The way you wait for a verdict, knowing you have done everything correctly, and knowing that correctness may not be enough. She steps outside of the storehouse, and then she hears horses. Not Iceni horses, heavier, iron shoes on packed ground. She turns and sees them at the edge of the compound, but her stomach tightens. There are too many of them. When the Romans come for tribute, they send a clerk and a small escort. 4 men, sometimes 5 or 6. She counts 8 riders. Behind them, soldiers on foot. And the man at the centre is not the usual clerk. Not the bored official who takes the tally and leaves without looking anyone in the eye. This one carries himself differently. He does not wait at the boundary. He rides straight in. The hall fills quickly. Word moves through the settlement faster than feet, and by the time the official steps inside, the room is full. Boudica stands near the front, where she has always stood, beside the place Prasatagus used to sit. The air is close. No one speaks. A local man translates as the official reads, "The will of Prasatagus, king of the Iceni. His kingdom is to be divided." She follows the Latin herself. She had heard enough of it over the years, in enough meetings with enough officials to track the meaning without translation. The terms begin as she expects. The daughters, the emperor, the division she knows by heart. But the official does not stop where the will stops. New language, new conditions, terms Prasatagus never set down and she never agreed to. The translator slows, searching for words, and in the gap she hears it clearly. Bona, possessiones, fiscus. Goods, property, treasury. Not the language of a will being honoured, the language of a kingdom being claimed. She does not move. Around her, the hall has gone still. An elder near the front stares at the ground with his jaw clenched. Beside her, a woman grips her own wrist so tightly the knuckles have gone white. The official finishes reading. He rolls the document, He does not look up. Boudica just stands there. The silence is not shock. It's heavier than that. It's the silence of a woman who's just heard the structure she built her family's survival around collapse, and who has not yet found the first word of a response. Outside, the rain continues. Water runs from thatch in slow, uneven lines. This is the story of Boudica. Not the myth, not the warrior queen of statues and legends. The woman. The woman who stood in a hall in eastern Britain, in the silence after a broken promise, and understood that the world she had navigated so carefully no longer existed. It's a story about what happens when the terms change and the arrangement you built your life around is quietly, bureaucratically revoked. So how does a system that appears stable collapse? How does a woman who spent her life inside that system, who kept its rules, paid its costs, built her family's survival around its promises, come to the conclusion that the only thing left is to tear it down? And what does it cost when she does? You're listening to The Crow's Tales, and this is the story of the betrayal of Boudica. Britain did not fall to Rome in a single blow. It was absorbed, slowly, unevenly over years, through a combination of military force, political calculation, and the careful exploitation of divisions that already existed. The invasion began in AD 43, under the Emperor Claudius. It was, in many respects, a piece of theatre. Claudius was an unlikely emperor, awkward, bookish, widely mocked by the Senate, elevated to power not through merit or ambition, but because he was the last man standing after the assassination of Caligula. He needed a military triumph to secure his position. Britain was the stage. 4 legions crossed the Channel, roughly 40,000 men. They landed in the southeast and fought their way inland, breaking the resistance of the Cativaloni, the most powerful tribe in the region, and advancing on their stronghold at Camuloginum, modern-day Colchester. Claudius himself arrived only for the final act. He crossed the Channel with an entourage that included senators, advisors, and war elephants, brought not for tactical advantage, but for the spectacle. He was present at Camuloginum when 11 British kings submitted formally to Roman authority. He stayed for 16 days, long enough to accept their surrender, long enough to be seen. Then he returned to Rome, where a triumphal arch was raised in his honour, and the distant island he had barely set foot on was declared a province of the empire. But the submission of 11 kings did not mean the submission of Britain. What followed was a slow, grinding process of incorporation that would take decades and never be fully completed. Some tribes fought and were broken. The Siluris in the hills of what is now South Wales resisted for years. Others submitted early and were rewarded with the status of allies. By the late 50s AD, Rome's grip on the island was firm in the south and east, but tenuous everywhere else. The west was contested. The north was barely touched. The Brigantes, the largest tribe in Britain, were a client kingdom, but fractious and unreliable. Roman forts and roads pushed outwards from the southeastern core, but vast stretches of the island remained beyond effective Roman control. This was not a conquered province. It was a province still being built, by an army stretched across a landscape it did not fully command. The Romans understood this. They needed cooperation, and cooperation, in the Roman model, meant client kings. The system was straightforward in principle. A tribal ruler who accepted Roman authority kept his position. He governed his own people, maintained local law, and collected tribute on Rome's behalf. In return, he received Rome's protection, the implicit guarantee that his kingdom would endure and that his family would inherit after him. It was not partnership. The client king served at Rome's pleasure, and his authority lasted only as long as Rome found it useful. But for a ruler who understood that armed resistance had failed and that survival now meant accommodation, the arrangement offered something real. Autonomy within limits. A future, if a constrained one. The Iceni were among those who entered this arrangement early. Their territory lay on the east of Britain, in what is now Norfolk and parts of Suffolk and Cambridgeshire. They were a prosperous people. Their lands were fertile. When Julius Caesar first crossed the Channel a century before Claudius, the Iceni had been among the tribes that offered allegiance. And when the legions came again in AD 43, they did not resist. They read the moment correctly. They survived. For a time, the arrangement held. It did not hold without friction. The Roman governor Ostorius Scapula ordered the disarmament of all tribes within the occupied zone. All of them, including the allied kingdoms, including the Iceni. The logic, from Rome's perspective, was security. But to the Iceni, the order was a betrayal. They had submitted voluntarily, they had kept the peace, and now the Romans were stripping them of the one thing that distinguished an ally from a subject, the right to bear arms. The Iceni refused. There was a brief, sharp uprising. It was crushed quickly and without mercy. And out of that failed rebellion, a new king emerged. Prasutagus, a man who had seen what resistance cost, and who would spend the rest of his reign making sure the price was never paid again. Prasutagus was not a puppet. He was a pragmatist. He understood the arrangement better than most, and he worked within it with a discipline that kept his kingdom intact for more than a decade. His long prosperity was not an accident. It was the product of constant, careful negotiation with a power that could revoke his existence at any moment. And Boudica was part of that negotiation, not as a figurehead, not as a consort in the Roman sense, but as a working partner in the governance of the kingdom. Among the Celtic peoples of Britain, women could hold authority and property in ways that Rome neither recognised nor respected. Boudica managed the household, which, for a client king, meant managing the political relationship at the ground level. She was the one who ensured the tribute was ready when the collectors came. She was the one who received Roman officials when Prasutagus was away, who sat through the tedious formalities of inspection and assessment, who learned enough Latin to follow the important parts of what was said and enough about Roman protocol to know when something was routine and when it was not. She did this work for years, quietly, competently, without recognition from Rome and without needing it. The kingdom functioned because two people ran it, and she was one of them. The cost of keeping the arrangement alive was real. It was paid in grain and cattle and iron, year after year. It was paid in silence when Roman officials were rude. It was paid in deference when deference was not deserved. But for the Iceni under Prasutagus and Boudica, the cost was bearable. The fields were sown and harvested. The settlements stood. Their daughters grew up knowing peace. And if the arrangement was not freedom, it was at least a life that could be planned around, a life that could be passed on. But the Iceni were not the only people living under this system, and elsewhere, the terms of the deal were already failing, in ways that would matter enormously when the Iceni's own crisis came. To the south, the Trinovantes had been among the most powerful tribes in Britain. Their territory stretched across what is now Essex, and their capital had been at Camulogenum. After the conquest, Rome converted Camulogenum into a colonia, a settlement for retired legionaries. The veterans were given farms carved from land that had belonged to the Trinovantes for generations. They did not negotiate, they did not compensate, they arrived with the authority of Rome behind them and took what they wanted, driving the native population from their homes, seizing property, calling the peoples whose land they now worked captives and slaves. They acted as though they had received the entire country as a gift. At the centre of the colony stood the Temple of Claudius, a vast stone structure raised to honour the now deified emperor. It was funded by British taxes. Its priests were drawn from the local elite, men compelled to pour their personal fortunes into the maintenance of a cult dedicated to their own subjugation. It was the citadel of an internal tyranny, and the Trinovantes were the people forced to pay for it. The Trinovantes were the Iceni's nearest neighbours. Their grievances were different in detail but identical in kind, and they were not the sort of grievances that faded with time. Further away, on the far side of the province, another kind of pressure was building. The Isle of Mona, Anglesey, off the northwest coast of Wales, had become a sanctuary. It was the last major stronghold of the Druids, the priestly class who served as keepers of law, tradition, and religion across the Celtic world. For the displaced and the dispossessed, Mona was a refuge. For Rome, it was an irritant that had grown into a threat. The Druids represented a form of authority that existed entirely outside of the Roman system, spiritual, cultural, ungovernable. As long as Mona stood, there was a place in Britain where Roman power did not reach. By AD 60, the governor Suetonius Paulinus had decided to end this. He marshalled his forces and marched west, building flat-bottomed boats to cross the shallow strait to the island. The assault on Mona meant that the governor and the bulk of the province's fighting strength were at the far western edge of the territory, as far from the Iceni as it was possible to be. And then there was the money. In Rome, the emperor had changed. Claudius had died in AD 54, almost certainly poisoned by his own wife to secure the succession for her son. The new emperor was Nero. He was 17 when he took the throne, young, vain, and increasingly consumed by his own appetites. In the early years of his reign, the real power lay with his advisors. Chief among them was the philosopher Seneca, tutor to the young emperor, one of the wealthiest men in Rome, and a man whose financial interests stretched far beyond philosophy. Seneca had extended enormous loans to British tribal leaders, 40 million sesterces, offered to men who had not asked for the money and were in no position to refuse it. For years, the debt sat quietly. Then, without warning, Seneca called it in. All of it, at once. The financial strain spread across the allied kingdoms of southern Britain. Tribal leaders who had accepted the money in good faith, or under pressure, now faced demands for repayment they could not meet. None of these pressures by itself was enough to break the system. The veterans at Camalodunum were brutal, but their brutality was localized. The Temple of Claudius was a provocation, but provocations could be endured. Seneca's loans were crushing, but debts could be negotiated, deferred, survived. The assault on Mona was devastating to those who looked to the Druids for spiritual authority, but Mona was far away. Each grievance, taken alone, was manageable. Each one could be absorbed by people who had spent years absorbing these things. But they weren't alone. They were simultaneous, and the system that was supposed to manage them was not designed to manage them. It was designed to extract compliance. It had no mechanism for listening, no channel for appeal, no process by which a subject could say, "This is too much." Prasutagus understood this. Boudica understood it too. And as his health failed, they faced the question together. What happens when he is gone? The answer was his will. Half the kingdom to their daughters, half to the Emperor Nero. It was the calculated bet that Rome would honour the arrangement because the arrangement gave Rome what it wanted without the expense of taking it by force. Prasutagus knew the risks. He knew that a will was only as strong as the willingness of the powerful to honour it. He knew that Roman law did not recognise female inheritance the way that Celtic custom did, and that the emperor to whom he was entrusting half his kingdom was a young man he had never met. He wrote the will anyway, because the alternative was worse. The will was the best hand he could play, and he played it. Prasutagus died, the will was submitted to Rome, and for a brief, suspended moment, the future of the Iceni, everything they had built together, hung on a decision being made by men who had never set foot in an Iceni settlement. Men for whom the kingdom was a line in a ledger, an asset to be weighed against the cost of honouring a dead man's wishes. Rome decided quickly. The men who came to the Iceni kingdom after the death of Prasutagus did not come to negotiate. They came to take. They arrived with the authority of the chief financial officer of the province. He was not a soldier, he was an administrator. But the men he sent were centurions, backed by armed escorts and accompanied by slaves from the imperial household. They moved through the kingdom as though it were already Roman territory, because in their understanding, it was. The will of Prasutagus had been set aside, not rejected formally, not debated, not returned with amendments, simply ignored. The kingdom of the Iceni was now the property of Rome, its wealth, its land, its people, all of it forfeit. The arrangement that had governed Iceni life for more than a decade had been dissolved in a decision made by men who had never set foot in Norfolk, and the people who lived inside that arrangement were the last to know. What followed was not war, it was confiscation. Centurions moved through the settlements with lists and armed escorts, cataloguing and seizing property. Grain stores that families had laid down for winter were loaded onto carts. Livestock was driven from enclosures and herded south. Metalwork, tools, weapons, ornaments, the accumulated craft of generations, was taken. The homes of Iceni nobles were entered and stripped bare. Men who had held their family estates since before the Roman invasion were told they no longer owned them. They were not given a reason. They were simply informed what had been theirs was now Rome's. It happened over days, across the breadth of the kingdom, settlement by settlement, household by household. The infrastructure of Iceni life was dismantled. Women watched the contents of their storehouses carried out by men who did not speak their language and loaded onto carts they would never see again. Children stood in doorways while soldiers walked through their homes, picking up objects, assessing their values, setting aside what was worth taking. The process was orderly. That was the worst of it. It was not a raid, it was an audit. The relatives of the dead king were reduced to the status of slaves. Not prisoners, not hostages, slaves. The distinction mattered. A prisoner could be ransomed, a hostage had political value, a slave had neither. These were the people who had stood at the centre of Iceni political life, who had dined with Roman officials, who had been part of the machinery of cooperation. Now they were property. Boudica tried to stop it. She went to the centurions, the same kind of men she had dealt with for years, in the same kind of meetings, using the same careful formality. She invoked the will. She explained that the terms were set, that the emperor had been named co-heir, and that the arrangement was known and agreed. The centurions listened, or did not listen. It made no difference. They had their orders. The will was irrelevant. She could speak or she could be silent, but the carts would be loaded either way. She sent word to the governor. Suetonius Paulinus was hundreds of miles away on Anglesey. The financial officer's authority was separate from the governor's command. He did not answer to Suetonius. He answered to Rome. There was no court above him, no tribunal to which the Iceni could bring their case. Every channel she knew, she tried. Every mechanism the system had given her, she used. None of them worked. None of them had ever been designed to work. Not for this. Not for her. The protections the Iceni had believed in had never been written into law or treaty. They were assumptions, and now those assumptions were being dismantled in broad daylight by men with the legal authority to do exactly what they were doing. And then they came for her. Boudica is brought out of the hall and into the open ground at the centre of the settlement. She walks. The soldiers grip her arms, but she does not resist, does not pull against them. Her back is straight, her face is set. She has been a queen for as long as most of these people can remember, and she carries that in her body even now. The way she holds her head, the steadiness of her step on the cold ground. Whatever is coming, she will not give them the satisfaction of dragging her to it. The light is flat, the sky is the colour of slate. Soldiers stand in a loose perimeter. Not many, but armed, and enough. The Iceni are there. The compound is full of people, and none of them are speaking. A centurion stands in front of her. He does not address her by title. He does not read charges. There are no charges. She has committed no offence. What is about to happen is not a punishment, it is a statement, designed to make visible what the confiscations have already made clear. The woman who stood beside the king has no status left. The royal household is property of Rome, and Rome does what it likes with its property. She is turned, held in place. 2 soldiers, one on each side, their grips tightening on her arms. She stares at the ground in front of her. The mud is dark and compacted. She can see the boots of the men holding her. The first blow comes from behind. The sound is sharp and percussive, leather on skin, carrying across the open ground. She pitches forward against the grip of the men holding her. The breath leaves her body. The crowd flinches, not as one, but in a ripple, a collective contraction, as though the blow landed on all of them. The second blow falls, then the third. The rhythm is steady, unhurried, mechanical. The soldier with the whip does not speak. He does not need to. The sound does the work. That flat, wet crack again and again, filling the silence that the crowd cannot break. Her knees buckle, but the arms hold her upright. The pain is layered now, each stroke landing on skin already torn, and the heat of it spreads across her back and shoulders like something spilled. She does not cry out. Her jaw is clenched so tight that the muscles in her neck stand out like cords. The composure she carried into this place, the straightness of her back, the stillness of her face, is being broken apart one blow at a time. And she is fighting it with everything she has. Not for herself, but for the people watching. Because she is still their queen, and if she screams, then the last thing they can hold on to, the idea that there is still something in this place that Rome cannot reach, goes with it. The blows continue. Every elder she has sat in council with is hearing this. Every woman who has sat beside her in the hall. Every child who has known her face their whole life. The queen of the Iceni, held upright by Roman soldiers while a man with a whip opens up her back in the centre of their settlement. The humiliation is not incidental, it's the purpose. The pain is the mechanism, but the audience is the point. It ends. The soldiers release her arms. She drops forward. Her hands hit the ground. The cold air meets the broken skin of her back, and the shock of it pulls the sound from her. Not a scream, something lower, something involuntary. For a moment, she stays there, on her hands and knees, breathing. Then she lifts her head. Her daughters are in the crowd. She finds their faces the way you find light in a dark room, instantly, without searching. They are standing together near the front, close enough to see everything, and their faces are white and rigid with terror. But they are there, and they are standing. And for one moment, a fraction of a second, no longer, something passes between them. Not words, not even a look that could be named, just the fact of seeing each other, the fact of still being here. Then the soldiers move. Two men step through the crowd from behind and take the girls by the arms. It's fast. There is no warning. One of the daughters twists, tries to pull free, and the soldier jerks her forward with a grip that lifts her onto her toes. The other girl does not struggle. She goes rigid, her body locking, her eyes fixed on her mother's face as she is pulled backward through the crowd. Boudica tries to stand. Her legs fail. She tries again. A sound comes from the crowd. Not a shout, not a word. Something deeper and more animal than that. A moan. A collective exhale of horror. The girls are gone, taken behind a line of soldiers, out of sight. What is done to them does not need to be described. It is enough to know that it happened, and that every person in that settlement knew it was happening, and that nobody could stop it. Two girls, the daughters of a king who spent his life keeping the peace with Rome. That is enough. It was enough then, and it is enough now. When it's over, the flogging, the assault, the final act of a confiscation that had taken everything, then found something more to take, the Romans leave. They move on to the next settlement, the next set of grain stores, the next list of assets. For them, this is administration. For Boudicca, it is the end of every calculation she has ever made. In the days that followed, a silence settled over the Iceni lands. Not the silence of shock, that had passed, a different kind of quiet. The quiet of people recalculating. For years, the logic had been clear. You endure, you comply, you pay what is asked. You accept the costs because the alternative, resistance, war, destruction, is worse. That logic had governed every decision she and Prasutagus had ever made. Every interaction with Rome. Every moment of deference and silence and swallowed pride. It was rational. It was sane. And it had purchased nothing. The tribute, the grain, the cattle, the iron. All of it had bought nothing when the crisis came. Boudica had been flogged in front of her own people. Her daughters had been raped. Her nobles enslaved. Her kingdom dissolved. All of this had happened not because the Iceni had resisted, but because they had cooperated. They had done everything right. and it had not mattered at all. The shift that followed was not a single moment. There was no speech, no dramatic declaration. What happened was quieter than that, and more fundamental. It was the recognition, felt individually at first, then shared, then spreading outward across the settlements of eastern Britain. That the old logic no longer applied. Endurance was not a strategy. Compliance was not protection. The system had revealed itself to be nothing more than a mechanism for extraction, and the people it extracted from had no standing within it at all. Boudica did not become a rebel leader because she chose to. She became one because every other option had been removed. The deal was broken. Her family had been brutalized. The man who had held the arrangement together was dead. What remained was a woman with a grievance so total that it could not be contained within the structures that had created it. And she was not alone. In the settlements of the Iceni, the decision did not need to be announced. It moved through the kingdom the way the weather moves. A change in pressure felt before it is named. Men sharpened tools that could serve as weapons. Stores that had not yet been seized were hidden. Women moved grain and dried meat to places the centurions had not yet reached. Every family in the kingdom had lost something in its confiscations. Every family knew what had been done to their queen, and every family understood, without needing to be told, that the time for absorbing things had passed. The Trinovantes to the south had been living with their own version of this for years. Their land confiscated for Roman veterans, their wealth drained to fund a temple to a dead emperor, their people treated as captives on their own soil. When word reached them of what had been done to the Iceni queen, to her daughters, to the nobles who had kept the peace, it did not ignite something new, it confirmed something old. The grievance had been there since the first Roman veteran walked into a Trinovantes farmstead and claimed it as his own. Messengers moved between settlements on forest paths and river crossings, the old routes that predated the occupation. The Iceni and the Trinovantes were the core, but they were not the only ones. Other tribes sent men, people who had watched the Roman system close around them for years, who had concluded that cooperation and resistance led to the same place. Some came from settlements that had lost land. Some came from families that owed debts that could not be repaid. Some came because they had heard what had been done to Boudica and her daughters, and understood that if it could happen to a queen, it could happen to anyone. The numbers grew, not in a rush, but steadily, the way water rises when the ground can no longer absorb it. The anger that moved through eastern Britain in those weeks was not hot, it was cold. It was the anger of people who had been patient for a very long time, and who had just learned that their patience had been mistaken for submission. The force that assembled was enormous, perhaps up to 120,000. The scale was beyond anything the province had seen. This was not a raiding party. It was not a border skirmish. It was the largest coordinated act of resistance Britain had ever produced. Drawn from multiple tribes across the east, united not by a shared king or a common culture, but by a shared experience of betrayal. At its head was Boudica, not because she had planned for this, but because she was the person to whom the worst had been done. And in a world where the right to lead came from what you had endured as much as what you had inherited, that was enough. The governor was still on Anglesey, and from the east, from the flat, fertile lands of Norfolk and Essex, a force was moving, gathering weight, gathering speed, toward the place where the Roman occupation of Britain had begun. Toward Camulodunum. Camulodunum had no walls. This was the place Rome had chosen to plant its flag in Britain. The colony where retired legionaries had been given confiscated land. Where the temple of Claudius rose over the rooftops like a declaration of permanent ownership. And it had no walls, no ditch, no rampart. The commanders who built it had been thinking about comfort, not defence. When Boudica's army came out of the east, the colony had almost nothing to meet it. The settlers had appealed to the chief financial officer, who had sent 200 men. 200 men, lightly armed, against a force of tens of thousands. The colony fell in a single onslaught. Everything outside the temple was overrun. The survivors retreated to the temple of Claudius and barricaded themselves inside. the temple held for 2 days. Then, it didn't. The 9th Legion, commanded by Batilius Cerealis, marched to relieve the colony. It arrived too late and advanced too fast. The Britons ambushed the column and destroyed the infantry. Cerealis escaped with his cavalry. The rest of his men were dead. News of the disaster reached Suetonius on Anglesey. He moved immediately, marching south and east across the breadth of the province towards Londinium. He arrived ahead of the rebel army. He assessed what he found. Londinium was a thriving commercial settlement, full of merchants and traders, but it had no more defences than Camulogenum had. Suetonius had, at most, the 14th Legion and a detachment of the 12th, perhaps 10,000 men. It was not enough to hold an open town. He made a calculation. He would save the province at the cost of the city. He gave the order to withdraw. Anyone who could march was taken. Anyone who could not was left behind. Londinium burned. Verulamium burned after it. 70,000 Roman citizens and their allies died across 3 towns. A number that may be inflated, but the scale of the killing was real. The rebels took no prisoners. They sold no one into slavery. There was none of the usual commerce of war. This was not conquest. It was repayment. And then Suetonius chose his ground. A position somewhere in the Midlands. A narrow defile, with thick forest at his back and open ground to the front. The terrain negated everything that should have worked in Boudica's favour. Her numbers meant nothing in a space where they could not deploy. Suetonius placed his legionaries in the centre, his auxiliaries on the flanks, his cavalry on the wings. He waited. Boudicca brought her army to him. She had driven the Romans from 3 cities. She had broken a legion. The momentum was hers and the numbers were hers, and there was no reason, standing at the head of the largest British force ever assembled, to believe that this would be the place where it ended. The Britons came. Behind their front lines, their families had followed in wagons and carts. A vast train of women and children drawn up at the rear, there to watch the victory. It would become the instrument of their destruction. The Roman line held. The legionaries threw their javelins, then advanced in a wedge, shields locked, short swords working at close range. The Britons, pressed together in the narrow space, could not use their numbers. The front ranks could not retreat because the rear ranks were still pushing forward. The discipline of the Roman formation broke the charge, then broke the army behind it. The rout began, and then the wagons stopped it. The fleeing Britons hit their own baggage train, the wall of carts and animals and families they had brought to witness the triumph. They could not get through. The Roman cavalry closed from the flanks. The slaughter was enormous. It did not distinguish between warriors and the people who had come to watch. Boudica survived the battle, and what happens next is uncertain. She took poison, or she fell ill and died. She was given a burial, and then she was gone. The revolt was over. Roman Britain survived for another 3 centuries, but it survived differently. The rebellion had not ended the occupation. It had not driven Rome from the island. In purely military terms, it had failed, and yet it had changed things. The way that a catastrophe changes the behaviours of the people who caused it, not through conscience, but through calculation. The terms of the occupation shifted. The worst abuses were curtailed. The client-king system, already broken, was allowed to fade. What replaced it was more direct, more structured, and marginally less likely to produce the kind of desperation that had sent 100,000 people marching towards Camulogenum. Whether this counted as justice was not a question the Romans asked. It was not a question Boudica lived to see answered. The province went on. The roads were laid, the towns rebuilt. The dead were buried. And somewhere in eastern Britain, in a grave that no one has ever found, the woman who tried to burn it all down was given back to the earth, and the earth closed over her. And the years began to pile up like sediment, until even the name was nearly forgotten, and the story had to be told again from the beginning by the people who were not there. Well then, there you have it. If you've listened this far and like what you've heard, consider liking and subscribing. Also hit that notification bell to be notified of future stories. I release a new one every Sunday. As a new channel, it helps so much, not only in pushing these stories in front of more of you lovely people, but also reassures me I'm not just sending these off into the ether, never to be seen again. If you've listened this far and don't like what you've heard, then, what on earth are you doing? Right then, off you pop. Thanks for listening.